All right, good afternoon. On Yemen, our colleagues at the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs tell us that since the start of the blockade on 6th November, all humanitarian flights to Sana'a Airport and all humanitarian and commercial vessel movements to Hodeidah and Salif ports have remained blocked. Without Sana'a Airport and Hodeidah and Salif seaports fully functioning and able to receive cargo, the dire humanitarian situation in Yemen will continue. 7 million people are already on the brink of famine, and the blockade will only bring them closer to it, our humanitarian colleagues are warning. Meanwhile, UNHCR today also said it was alarmed at the worsening humanitarian situation in Yemen following the closure of the land, sea, and air borders. UNHCR supported center in Sana'a for the internally displaced. Hundreds more people are approaching the facility daily, saying they are no longer able to meet basic needs or afford medical care. The border closures are hindering aid deliveries as new stocks of UNHCR emergency assistance targeting 280,000 internally displaced Yemenis have been halted. Some UNHCR staff have also been affected, with some stranded outside the countries and other lacking fuel transport. The Secretary General has now left Manila and is on his way to Bonn to attend the 23rd Conference of Parties, otherwise known as COP23, where he said he would appeal to all leaders to have a greater ambition in the fight against climate change. CO2 emissions are again on the rise, and the Paris Agreement is at risk, he tweeted, adding that we must all do better. The Secretary General in Manila, as you know, had bilateral meetings with the Prime Ministers of Singapore, Cambodia, and Cambodia, and he also had a meeting with the U.S. Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson. And in Manila earlier today, the Secretary General also participated in a luncheon of the East Asia Summit hosted by President Duterte of the Philippines. And the climate conference in Bonn today is focusing on how to increase countries' resilience on the impacts of climate change. As part of the Action Day on Resilience, Germany pledged $125 million for global partnership that aims to provide insurance to 400 million poor and vulnerable people by 2020. And Norway announced that it is setting up a $400 million fund to invest in business models that combine investments in high productivity, agriculture, smallholder inclusion, and forest protection. And we had been asked a few times, I think last week, following reports that the Syrian Arab Republic had submitted its instruments regarding the Paris climate change. And we can now confirm, indeed, that the instruments of accession by the Syrian Arab Republic to the Paris Agreement on Climate Change have been accepted in deposit, effective yesterday, November 13th. The Paris Agreement, as you know, will enter into force for Syria on December 13th of this year. And also on Syria, though a different context, as part of his preparation for the 8th round of intra-Syrian talks set to begin in Geneva on November 28th. The special envoy for Syria, Stephane de Mistura, met today with Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Gennady Gatilov. And that meeting took place in Geneva. In light of the significant statement made by the Russian and U.S. presidents on November 11th when they met in Vietnam, the special envoy emphasized the importance of operationalizing the provisions of Resolution 2254. The special envoy intends to continue consultations with international interlocutors in the coming period ahead of the resumption of the intra-Syrian talks. We remain concerned for the safety and protection of some 400,000 civilians in the besieged area of East Ghouta, as fighting continues to be reported in several areas, despite the signing of a de-escalation agreement in July. Today, according to initial reports, airstrikes and artillery shelling in many cities and towns resulted in several civilian deaths and injuries. All schools in East Ghouta will reportedly be closed tomorrow. And turning to Bangladesh, our humanitarian colleagues there tell us that the numbers of Rohingya refugees who have fled Myanmar to Bangladesh since August 25th have now reached 618,000 people. The UN Migration Agency, IOM, has found that human trafficking and exploitation is rife among Rohingya refugees who who have fled Myanmar for Bangladesh. This is according to interviews and focus groups they've been conducted in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. Exploitation has been reported by Rohingya refugees not only among those who arrived since the 25th, but also among those who have lived in Bangladesh for years. IOM says that desperate refugees are being recruited with false offers of paid work. With almost no alternative source of income, they are willing to take whatever opportunities they are presented with, even if they are risky, dangerous ones that involve their children. The agency is also concerned about forced and early marriages taking place among the Rohingya refugee population. And our colleague Alain Nudehu, the humanitarian coordinator for South Sudan, yesterday welcomed President Salva Kiir's decree for ordering the free and unimpeded and unhindered movement of humanitarian organizations in the country. He said that Mr. Nudehu said humanitarian workers hope the orders will have a positive impact in reducing the many constraints they face that delay or prevent the provision of urgently needed help, and with too often humanitarian personnel at risk. He added that humanitarian workers look forward to seeing the order implemented on the ground swiftly and will continue to work with all concerned authorities to ensure safe and secure operational environment that is conducive to the timely delivery of humanitarian aid to those who need it. And this morning, the Security Council adopted Resolution 2384, which renews the Eritrea and Somalia sanctions for another 12 months. The Council was then briefed by the Secretary General's Special Representative for Kosovo, Zahir Tanin, in a separate meeting. He said the UN mission in Kosovo is working to help the people pursue the benefits of cooperation and reconciliation, finding energy with the new government, which is already taking steps to work in a multi-ethnic partnership. Mr. Tanin stressed the mission's final objective remains clear: sustain peace and the opportunity it brings for individuals to fulfill their aspiration and potential. And on Libya, I wanted to flag a very powerful statement from the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Zeid Ra'ad Al Hussein, on the conditions in which migrants are being held in detention facilities in Libya. That statement is online. And yesterday we sent out a note to correspondents on a letter of assist that was signed between the Undersecretary General for Field Support, Atul Kare, and the government of Israel to extend technology pilot project designed to improve security at the UN mission in Central African Republic. Since 2015, Israel has contributed both static and mobile observation systems to MINUSCA. These capacities have proven highly successful in increasing situational awareness and preventing outbreaks of violence, including during the Pope's visit, the elections in Bangui, and many other events associated with the potential security threats. Following detailed evaluation process, the mission has approved the government of Israel's proposal to expand its existing observation system, which will include measures to fully integrate the technology into the mission's day-to-day operations. And today is World Diabetes Day, and on this day, this year, the World Health Organization is highlighting women's right to a healthy future. According to WHO, there are some 422 million people living with diabetes. 205 million of them are women, with more than half in the Western Pacific and Southeast Asia regions of the world. WHO is promoting affordable and equitable access for all women with diabetes or at risk of diabetes to the essential medicines and technology, self-management, education, and information they require to achieve optimal diabetes outcome and strengthen their capacity to prevent type 2 diabetes. Halas. Madame.
Stephane, any new initiative for the release or to help Saad Hariri's return to Lebanon?
No, as we've said, we have no independent information on Mr. Hariri. We've remained very concerned at the situation and obviously his absence from Lebanon, and we would like to see clarity as soon as possible. Evelyn.
Yes, you said there was no food going to Sana'a in Yemen and the Red Sea ports. Have the Saudis opened up the ports for Aden?
No, we understand that there may be some traffic going in and out of Aden, but the point I think we've made here our colleagues in Geneva has made is that the port of Aden is in no way sufficient to make up for the closure of Hodeida and Salif ports. They don't have the capacity, both in terms of ships. They don't also have the milling capacity to process the wheat that is going in. And obviously, one has to understand that ports are operate through reservation system, and so there already are ships that are scheduled to dock. And the point that we're making and making strongly in different places is that we need those ports, Salif and Hodeida, to be open. Yes, Ali.
On the same issue, do you find it reasonable that the coalition and Saudi Arabia are asking for additional inspect and search protocols in order to secure that the humanitarian aids are not used to smuggle arms to Yemen through Hodeida and Sana'a? And are you in touch with the coalition and Saudi Arabia in order to address their concerns?
I think it's my colleague Jamie McGoldrick, the humanitarian coordinator in Yemen, said, I think earlier today. I think we are willing to have conversations about the inspections, but what we need now is for those ports to reopen and for Sana'a airport to be open. They should not be contingent on further discussions. There is a humanitarian crisis that the people of Yemen are facing, a catastrophic crisis, as Mr. McGoldrick has said, as Mr. Lowcock has said, as we have said from here, and that needs to be addressed urgently. Mr. Bays.
You mentioned Sana'a Airport. There have been fresh reports that not only is Sana'a Airport still closed, but there's now been another air raid on Sana'a Airport, putting it out of service.
We obviously saw those reports. We're very concerned about the attacks on the airstrikes on Sana'a Airport. What my colleagues are telling me from having visited the airport earlier today is that the runway is not damaged. The taxiway, the ramp, and the terminal were not hit, and they're in good condition. Humanitarian flights could still come in and out using visual approach. We just now need the guarantees from the coalition that the airport can be used. Yes, Young. One second. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
You've been very patient.
Shiho from Nippon Television. Could you tell us a little bit about a letter submitted by DPRK yesterday regarding the joint military exercise by the United States and South Korea, and what is the reaction, Secretary General's reaction to that letter? Thank you.
Yes, the letter has been received, and it is about or will be circulated to all members of the Security Council as requested by the DPRK. So it is, we've shared it with the Council as requested. Yes, sir.
Yeah, in view that Sana'a Airport is not a military site, there are no airplanes or fighters taking off from there or attacking Saudi Arabia. Do you condemn such an attack, given that the raiders were hit, and they are essential instrumental for the landing of any aid to Sana'a?
We have obviously condemned, and we will continue to condemn any attacks that take place on civilian infrastructure. As I said, the airport is usable. The pilots will have to use visual approaches, but it is usable. We now need the assurance from the coalition that the airport will be reopened.
So you condemn the attack on Sana'a
I think
airport.
I've just answered your question. Mr. Lee, then Mr. Avni.
Sure. I wanted to ask you, I have other things, but I want to ask you about this Rosewood situation. I'd asked you yesterday, you'd said that everything is answered in the statement.
This press conference is being broadcast live. I feel bad for your wrist that you have to hold up the periscope.
It's fine.
Okay.
There have been times where you've run off the podium, so I wanted to...
don't worry.
Okay, I don't think you'll do it. It's too early in the proceedings.
I have to answer Benny's question first,
yeah, exactly.
and then I can run off.
Okay, so my question is as follows. And it's not answered by the Secretary General's statement. The allegation in the report, and it's documented by a guy holding up a sheet of paper that has bill of lading numbers on it, is that at the time that Amina Mohammed signed thousands of certificates in January 2017, that this wood was already in China, that the certificates were backdated, which is under CITES a major problem. So I wanted to know, she says that there's no evidence of that, but the evidence is in the report, and I'm directing you to figure 33.
I've read the report.
Okay. So what is her response to that, and how could the Secretary General say, I back her up entirely, in advance of the CITES meeting that's coming up in late November? Given that the CITES is part of the UN system, will he defer to them? If they find wrongdoing, will he take action?
I think the statement that we issued is pretty comprehensive. Ms. Mohammed, the Deputy Secretary General, said the signing of the legal signing of export permits for rosewood was delayed due to her insistence that stringent due process was followed. She said she signed the export certificates requested before the ban only after due process was followed and better security watermarked certificates became available.
Is it permissible to sign certificates when the wood is already in China?
You're making that assumption. I think she's answered.
That's why she's answered
the question.
Given that you talk about the environment and SDGs,
she's answered the question.
Mr. Avni, think that the answer is insufficient.
Okay. Well, Mr. Avni.
Before I get to my question, just to follow up, is it possible to get the DSG to address us?
We can see when she's currently traveling. What's your question?
Okay, so you mentioned before the Russian-U.S. agreement on Syria, on southern Syria. You said you noted it, or did you endorse it, or what's the deal there?
We've noted.
Noted.
We've noted it.
But there already seems to be a discrepancy between what the U.S. is saying the deal is and what the Russians are saying the deal is. The U.S. is saying that the deal is to remove all foreign forces from Syria. Well, it includes in removing all foreign forces from Syria, while the Russian is saying that Iranian and Hezbollah, the presence is legitimate, and that they will not remove those forces from Syria. So does the UN have any role?
Perhaps that's why we've said that we've noted the agreement.
So
for us, the statement confirms the importance of the de-escalation, the need for de-escalation of violence in Syria, the need for humanitarian aid to flow unhindered and unimpeded throughout the country. It also, from our standpoint, the statement provides the impetus for the political way forward laid out by the UN to address the conflict, and really lays out the pathway for the full implementation of Resolution 2254. Mr. de Mistura has had follow-on talks with the Deputy Foreign Minister of Russia, Gennady Gatilov, and obviously our discussions with various parties will continue. We will let the two parties who jointly agreed to the statement carry their understanding.
Are any of those goals you mentioned possible if foreign forces remain in Syria, especially since the Syrian neighbors are saying that they will not abide by Iranian?
I think what we're focusing on is having a successful round for the next intra-Syrian dialogue. Majid.
Stephane, about GIM and the effort to extend the mandate of GIM, what does the Secretary General think about this, and is he satisfied with the work of GIM so far?
I think the Secretary General very much supports the work that Mr. Millet and his team has done, and he finds that the work of the GIM is an extremely important work in accountability when it comes to the use of chemical weapons. Mr. Abadi.
Thank you, Stephane. In his statement to the ASEAN-UN summit in Manila yesterday, the Secretary General covered many global issues, including globalization, climate change, terrorism, human rights, peace and conflict, but not one word about preventive diplomacy, which on his calendar is the priority of all the priorities. How do you explain that?
I think the issue of preventive diplomacy was very much implied in the text. Mr. Bays.
Back to the GIM. The Security Council is currently among the members discussing the renewal of the GIM. What is at stake here if they are not able to renew the mandate of the GIM?
Listen, I will leave the predictions to journalists and analysts. As we've said, the work of the GIM is extremely important when it comes to the issue of accountability, when it comes to sending a message about the use of chemical weapons, the unacceptable use of chemical weapons. We very much hope that the Security Council will come to an agreement so that the GIM can continue with its important work. Mr. Iftikhar, I'll come back to you, Nizar.
Thank you, Stephane. My question is about the deadlock race for the International Court of Justice. I don't know whether it concerns you or Brendan, but may I ask, when is the balloting going to be resumed? And if there is any move to have a compromise candidate because of the deadlock?
Well, these issues are firmly in the hands of member states. They will have to keep voting or negotiate their way out of the deadlock as to when the next balloting will have. Maybe Brendan knows. Mr. Lee, then Nizar.
Sure. I wanted to ask you, in the third committee today, one of the country-specific resolutions, the one on Myanmar that the Secretary General himself referred to in his stakeout before he left, was not voted on, and it's because a program budget implication document was not ready. And I guess some people are wondering, given that it was known that this was the day, and that the resolution, or at least what they think is the cause of the PBI, why wasn't it ready? If the Secretary General is putting so much weight on this resolution,
I don't know why it wasn't ready.
Can you find out?
I don't know. If I find out, I will let you know.
I mean, it's a secretariat function.
No,
right?
I fully understand. There's certain knowns that I don't know.
And I wanted to also ask you, there's now, and this is not a leak, this is became public yesterday, OIOS audit of the pension fund. And among other findings that it makes that were rejected by the pension fund management, Sergio Arvizu, is one that says that after they put in IPAS, which cost a lot of money, the independent pension, IPAS, they put it in, and they said because it's not reliable, pension fund staff manually calculated and verified items with the resulting impact on efficiency, meaning the people that didn't actually get paid. And so I'm wondering, they actually seem to reject this recommendation. What is the Secretary General following this? Because it seems like a lot of money was spent on a system
I think Secretary General is following it,
work.
but this is also an issue for the pension board to take up. Nizar.
Yeah, you said that the Secretary General is very happy with the work of Jim and Mr. Moulet's report. Now, there are serious reservations by the Russian, the Syrian government officials and military accusations, very harsh accusations about the integrity of the mission and how they conducted their work. Does the Secretary General believe that these allegations should be reconsidered and that Mr. Moulet should look into them carefully?
Look, any part of the UN could always do better. What the overall message from the Secretary General is that he supports the very important work of the GIM.
But the Russian report and
I understand. We've seen, this ultimately it will be a decision for the Security Council to make. The GIM works under a mandate of the Security Council. It will be their decision. The Secretary General's position is one of support towards the work of the GIM and its important tasks.
Well, did Mr. Guterres discuss this with Mr. Moulet after what has been alleged?
I think the Secretary General has been kept fully abreast of all the issues regarding the GIM. Evelyn.
Back to Syria. The bombing was near Aleppo. More than 60 people were killed in a market, and planes flew overhead and started hitting anything that moved. Do you know if they were Syrian or Russian planes?
We have no way of knowing who is responsible for these dreadful attacks on civilians.
Also on the GIM, it seems to be there's a trend from the last report from Russia, because it's obvious that the Syrian government is fingered in each of the reports, whether the reports are airtight or not. Has the Secretary General at all spoken to the Russian Federation about, I mean, even Foreign Minister Lavrov, before we had the latest report, spent quite a bit of time at his press conference condemning
I think the Secretary General has been in touch with various parties, and Secretary General, his staff have been in touch with various parties on this. Mr. Abadi.
Thank you, Stephane. In answer to my question why the Secretary General didn't mention preventive diplomacy, you said that it's implied. Why such an important priority question be only implied?
The Secretary General gives many remarks all over the world. The fact that it may not have been explicitly mentioned in one speech, I think, does not take away from its importance. I will
Mr. EXG,
I will move.
How many days can it take to find out?
It's a mystery. It can take a long
time. He's listed in getting paid.